Rome was what an empire built on courage. It was in fact built mostly on debt. We love to remember Roman soldiers as unstoppable warriors marching with honor and discipline. But behind those shining helmets and sharp swords was an unbelievably complex and expensive supply system. Thousands of soldiers needed food, weapons, roads, and money. The animals needed feed, siege engines needed timber and workers. The list goes on, and all of it had a cost, a very serious one. So where did Rome find the money to sustain wars that lasted for centuries, and why should we still care? Because the closer you get to Rome's world of war, the clearer this becomes. War was not won on the battlefield, it was won in the heart of finance. Once the system began to work, stopping it wasn't easy. Expansion and growth were not a choice. They were an economic necessity. Sound familiar? Let's go back to the beginning. In Rome's early days, the army was its citizens. If you had land, you went to war when called. Soldiers brought their own weapons and returned to their farms when the campaign was over. But as the Republic grew, wars lasted longer and stretched farther. The old system began to crack. Grab a spear and fight for a year was no longer enough. Professional soldiers became a necessity. That's when Rome began centralizing military financing. The state started paying soldiers. Wages were modest, but enough to secure loyalty. Then came the turning point. Conquests became a financial model. Every new province meant new taxes, new slaves, new gold mines, new tributes. War became a self-financing system. More war brought more money. More money brought more war. But this is where things get strange and dangerous. Rome didn't run on taxes alone. It also drowned in debt. During costly long campaigns, the Republic took massive public loans from wealthy elites, especially the rising financial class, the equites. These weren't patriotic donations. They were investment loans, and like any investor, they expected returns, interest payments, tax collection rights, special privileges in newly conquered lands. War became a business, and the more profitable it got, the more wars Rome launched. Sound familiar? Over time, this militarized economy shaped Rome's very existence. Political power shifted to generals who promised spoils. Senators became partners in violence. Public contractors, the publicani, controlled everything from logistics to tax farming, channeling enormous wealth to themselves. A kind of military-industrial capitalism in togas emerged. And the expenses, they piled up, heavily. To pay soldiers and creditors, the state constantly needed new revenue. When conquests slowed or rebellions drained the treasury, Rome turned to the oldest trick in history, debasing the currency. Under Nero, the silver content of the denarius was quietly reduced. For the next 2 centuries, emperors continued this watering down. A once trustworthy coin turned into a hollow symbol. Then came inflation. Trust collapsed. By the 3rd century, Rome's monetary system was in free fall. Meanwhile, the wealthy were getting richer. Senators and equities protected their fortunes through land, slaves, and foreign accounts. The poor paid taxes with devalued money, while elites enjoyed exemptions and privileges. State services crumbled, corruption spread, and the endless wars were paid for mostly by the poor, through inflation, forced labor, and conscription. This wasn't just a military collapse, it was a monetary one. Now take a look around. Governments with giant budget deficits, wars financed by debt, central banks quietly diluting money to cover gaps, financial elites enriched by protective contracts and crises, economies forced to expand just to stay alive. Not identical, perhaps, but the similarities are uncomfortably close. Rome teaches us this. An economy built on violent expansion eventually hits a wall. You run out of land to seize, resources to extract, enemies to fight. And when that happens, the system collapses inward. Debts come due, promises can't be kept, and core revenues dry up. And what does the state do then? It starts squeezing its own people, just like Rome. Rome raised taxes, debased money further, used bread and circuses to distract the masses, offered safer villas and privileges for the elite. Sound familiar? Today we don't call these things tribute. We call them taxes, monetary expansion, monetary policy. But it's the same thing. Central banks print money. Governments spend more than they earn. The rich accumulate assets. The poor fight for survival in the supermarket with shrinking wages and rising prices. Wars are still financed with debt. The U.S. spent $2 trillion on Afghanistan, mostly borrowed. Who got the contracts? Who earned the interest? And who paid the price? Through inflation, reduced services, unstable money. You already know the answers. As in Rome, it's a vicious cycle. When debt becomes hard to repay, you no longer need a crisis to print money. Delaying collapse is enough. The abnormal becomes normal, and the longer it goes on, the more obliged you are to pretend everything is fine until the day it's not. That's what makes economic history so important. These aren't dusty tales. They're warning signs. They teach us a lot. Looking at Rome, we see a state that over-privatized its power, became addicted to expansion, rotted its own currency from within, and crushed its citizens under a burden no one was willing or able to stop. Not out of malice, but because there was no shut-off button built into the system. Today we live in a different empire, digital, global, run not by legions, but by capital flows. The game hasn't changed. Money and power still go hand in hand. War still fills certain pockets. Inflation still crushes the vulnerable. And these financial tricks keep working until the collision arrives. So what can you do? First, notice the pattern. Most people never do. Many believe inflation is a random fluctuation. Taxes are the only option. Debt brings freedom. Growth can continue forever. The Stoics had one word for this: delusion. You can't escape the system entirely, but you can understand it. You no longer have to play the game blindfolded. You can build your own resilience, not just with money, but with perspective. Financial literacy isn't just about calculations. It's about recognizing power, understanding how systems work, seeing what stability is actually covering up. When you hear about the next war, the next stimulus package, the next crisis, don't just watch. Follow the money. Who's providing the credit? Who's earning the profit? And in the end, who's paying the bill? If history teaches us anything, it's this. Empires don't fall when enemies storm the gates. They fall when their accounts stop adding up, and no one is willing to fix them. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. History is full of answers, and I'll show you where to find them.